Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Last week I pulled apart this swatch book of samples, lots of gorgeous prints in there, and I showed you how to make a really nice big bag that is suitable to hold a laptop. I want to use up all of these fabric samples in a batch sewing project, and the bag I did for you last week was this one here with the zippered top, using one of those samples on each side and a strip of vinyl on the bottom. Today we're going to make something a little bit different using the same kind of fabric. So this is today's project. The samples here are a little bit smaller because the sample swatches, the front two pieces were smaller. So I've used a piece of vinyl at the bottom, fabric on the front, a different one on the back, and then we have a fold over flap rather than a zippered closure at the top, and we've also installed the handles at the top rather than all the way down like we did with this bag. Big difference in size. So I wanted to do the batch sewing video, which will be what I'm going to be doing next, and I felt this was going to be way too time consuming and therefore too costly to put into the shop. I do still concern myself with the pricing of my products, and I don't want to sell myself short either. So I want to get the best value for the time that I put into my bags. So today's tutorial will be making this bag. Now, when I started this bag, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to be doing. Well, actually, that's a lie. I had a plan. This wasn't really it. So it kind of morphed as we progressed. So all the cutting instructions will be up on the screen all in one go, but I do kind of muck around with different ideas on the way. So let's get straight to it. Okay, here's everything we're going to need to make this bag. I'll put all the measurements up on the screen shortly. I have my char label, which is Christine's Home Affairs, that will go on the front somewhere. 2 pieces of vinyl, which we're going to put on the base of the bag. I have 2 pieces of upholstery fabric. I've already pre-cut this, and I've removed the paper that was on the sides, and this is the finished size of the fabric. So I've got 2 pieces for the back and front. We have a piece of iron-on interfacing, which we will be using for the pocket piece, which is for the inside of the bag. A couple of pieces of fusible stabilizer. The product I like to use is called Parlan. It's a really lightweight stabilizer. And then I have a couple of pieces of fabric which we will use for the lining. We'll also be using strapping for the handles. I have a couple of offcuts left over from the vinyl at the bottom, and I'm going to make some tabs for this, for the handles. And I think that's about it. I'm not going to put a zip in this one. I want to keep it really simple. Let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is fuse my stabilizers onto the back of my fabric. For the 2 main bodies of the bag, I'll go and fuse the stabilizer to that. And for the pocket piece, I'm going to place my interfacing directly over the top of 1/2, and I'll just fold that fabric in half and iron that in place. And I'll be right back. All right, with my fabric stabilized, I've also got my label on the bag. What we're going to do is take this pocket piece, open the fabric out, fold the fabric down, and we'll clip those edges together, and we're going to sew from the folded edge here down to the corner, across, backstitch here, leave an opening, repeat over here and come back up there. Once we've done that, we're going to trim the corners, and then we can turn this the right way out, give it another press, and we'll top stitch one long edge. For the outer pieces, we'll grab our vinyl, and we're going to place that along the bottom edge of our fabric. Better make sure my pineapples are the right way. And I'm going to be using double-sided tape to secure the vinyl to the fabric. It just helps prevent the layers from shifting, and it means I don't have to put pins or clips in place. Line that up evenly along the bottom. So we're going to stitch along the bottom edge here. Once we've done that, we will open the fabric out and top stitch. Not sure yet which side I'll be top stitching to. We'll work that out at the machine. Let's start with the pocket piece. Now the seam allowance is completely up to you. I'm just doing 1/4 inch for the pocket, and I will probably do the same for the vinyl as well. So we can trim the corners. I'll turn this the right way out, give it a press, and then I'll be back to top stitch. I've got my opening along the bottom here. We'll close that up when we put it onto the lining, and we'll just run a row of top stitching along the top edge of the pocket. Next, we'll attach the vinyl strip to the bottom of our bag. It is better to use a Teflon or a vinyl foot when you're sewing vinyl. If you don't have one, you can use a walking foot. I think you can put some silicone or something under your foot as well to help prevent it from grabbing. And before we top stitch that, we'll grab the other one. And we can increase our stitch length now to about 4 or 4.5, whatever you like. And I've increased mine to 4. So I usually let the fabric dictate which way it's going to sit. I feel as though if I have the vinyl sitting behind the fabric here, it's going to be a little bit too much bulk, because remember I've stabilised this. So what I'm going to do instead is let the vinyl sit behind the vinyl. And then I'll just make sure I move that seam underneath the vinyl. And we'll repeat for the other one. I ended up increasing the stitch length to 4.5 because it was dragging a little bit, and that seemed to work a bit better. Alright, so these pieces are ready to go. When you're making this bag, it's actually better to cut your lining at this point rather than having all of your fabric pieces cut out all at once, because your seam allowance might be different to mine, and even the cutting variations may be a little bit different as well. So measure this piece of fabric now and cut your 2 lining pieces to the size that you actually have. And our pocket piece is ready, and once you've got your lining pieces cut, we'll have 14 inches across this way, and we're going to place our pocket 3 inches from the top, which is about 8 centimetres. Because I'm using a really lightweight fabric for the lining, what I'm going to do is grab an extra piece of interfacing, and I've cut that to the same size as my pocket. So what I'm going to do is find the centre of my fabric, and I'm going to place this piece of interfacing 3 inches from the top. I'm going to iron it to the wrong side of my lining fabric. This will give the pocket a little bit of extra stability, because I feel once you sort of put things in and out all the time, you're going to stress the fabric and end up tearing it. So I'll go and iron that onto the wrong side of my fabric first, then when I come back I'll attach this pocket. So that's stabilised the section for the pocket, and I can place my pocket piece straight over the top of that, double check my measurements. And we'll sew down here, along here, up there, and as usual I will sew another channel along here for a pen. I do like to reinforce my corners by back stitching a couple of stitches and then forward again. And I'll just come over a couple of fingers width away, or about an inch, inch and a half, starting at the bottom. All right, we can set the lining pieces aside for the moment. We're going to get our bag prepared. And I've had a change of plans. I've decided, because I'm not putting a zip in, and I really didn't want to just put a magnetic closure in the top, I think I'd like to have a flap, a vinyl flap coming over the front. It'll be a nice decorative feature. So I'm going to cut some fabric for that, and I'll be back. All right, so what I've got here is a piece of vinyl and a piece of fabric for the back of it, and I've also stabilised that with just that iron-on interfacing that we used before. What we're going to do is mark two curves, and they can be any size. I'll do it on the vinyl. And before we attach the two pieces together, we need to grab one of our magnetic closures, or one side of it, fold this fabric in half, and this is the centre here. Then we want to make a mark for the closure to sit. I'll line that up along the centre there, and we'll measure down. We've got to make allowance for our seam, which is going to be about here, and then we'll also be top stitching, so we need to make an allowance for that as well. So I'll move that down a bit, and 1 inch from the outside edge is where I'm going to sit my washer. And I'll make a little mark on the side, and then we'll grab our seam ripper, we'll poke a hole in the bottom, and with the pointy end we're going to come up on the top of that mark we've made and just rip. And that's made a hole for the prongs to go through, and it's prevented you from accidentally pulling or ripping right through your fabric. So now we can place our magnetic closure through those slits that we've made. And we can spread those prongs apart, and our magnet is ready to go. So now we can place these two pieces right sides together, and we're going to sew from the top here down around the curve, keep on going down to the other end, backstitch at the beginning and the end. This line here, we don't need to cut it out just yet. I like to use that as a guideline, so my presser foot will run along the edge of the vinyl, and it'll continue to run along the edge of that marked line that I've made, giving me a nice consistent seam allowance. Then we will trim our curves, turn it the right way out, and we'll top stitch. You'll notice I've stitched this twice, and that's because I'm using a regular sew-all thread, and it just, using the vinyl, it just gives this a little bit more strength. So we can cut that curve out, and then clip into the curve You can trim it back a little bit more if you feel you need to. And then turn this the right way out and top stitch. And once again, I've increased my stitch length. I think this time I'll just leave it at 4. I do forget often to remind you what size needles I use. Most of the time when I'm sewing, I'll just use a regular 90 or 14 universal sewing machine needle. I don't use leather, I don't use a vinyl needle, I don't use any fancy needles at all. It is really just the 90 or size 14 sewing machine needle. All right, now that that flap is done, we can add that to the back of our bag. So I'm going to have that sitting across the front like that. I think that'll tie in nicely. So let's take the back of our bag, we'll fold that in half, find the centre, which is just about there. Fold the flap in half, find the centre of that, and with the wrong side facing up, we're going to match those marks and stitch that in place. And I'll go and quickly do that now. So I've sewn that flap in place, and what we can do now is put the magnetic closure on the front of our bag, find the centre, line up the top edges of your bag, bring that flap over, let the fabric sit the way it wants to, and then we'll bring this flap over and just mark a little indent here where the magnet is, and you should see an impression on the fabric here. So that's my circle here, which is about 1 inch from the top. So what I'm going to do here is place my washer where that circle is, mark the slots again, and we'll do the same as we did before. Pop the magnet through, and those two will line up. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is put our handles on, and I'd like to make a decorative feature again of the vinyl. So I've got a few scrappy pieces of vinyl, and what my plan is to have a strapping handle coming from here, going to about here, and then having a decorative piece of vinyl over the top. So that'll hide these raw edges. It means we don't have to sew the handle into the seam at the top. I just think it's a nice way to use up some scrap bits of vinyl. I've cut 2 lengths of strapping for my bag. The length that you want is really up to you. I never know from one bag to the next what size I want my handles to be. I kind of just place it over the fabric and think, yeah, that'll look okay. So handles really are just up to the individual. Now, my webbing or strapping is 1 inch wide. I've got an offcut of vinyl here that is, let's say that's 1.5 inches in width, and I need 4 pieces all up that are going to cover the edge of my webbing. And I like the taper that's on this, so I think I'm going to fold this in half, and this was already pre-tapered because it's a scrap of vinyl that somebody gave me, so I think I'll copy that on the other side. All right, I've gone and cut my vinyl pieces at 1 3/4 inch along the bottom, and along the top it's 1 1/4 inch, and I've just tapered them in on the diagonal. You can make them a little bit larger. This was the largest size that I had to use. So now what we're going to do is place our handles onto the bag, and we're going to place them straight down like this. And I think 3 inches from the outside edge will be good. And we might go 3 inches from the top as well. I'm just going to place my little vinyl thing over the top and see how that looks. So that's going to still allow my flower to stand out, and I think I'm happy with that. So I'm going to place a little bit of double-sided tape just on the end of the strapping, and that will hold it in place whilst I stitch it down. So 3 inches or 8 centimetres from the outside edge and the top edge. Keep your handle nice and flat as you bring it around. And keeping the vinyl strap in mind, we only need to sew across here, up, across and down again. We don't want to sew all the way to the top. I'm only going to sew up from the bottom 1 inch across and down again. And we'll do the same for the other side. A little bit of double-sided tape. This is easier to use than pins because pins have a tendency to distort the layers, so you might get some puckering or rippling in your handles. So it's easier to keep this in place with some tape. Let's sew those in place. I'll triple stitch across here. Now we can put our little vinyl pieces over the ends here. So I think having the widest point at the top will look better. So I'm going to place these about 3.5 to 3/4 of an inch from the top edge. And look, as long as it looks good when you line that up. So I'm using reference lines from my cutting mat here. And I'm just going to place that evenly over the top like that and stitch all the way around that little bit of vinyl. And if you want to, you can do a cross in the centre as well. And I've lined up the other side as well and placed those little vinyl tabs over the top. Let's secure that in place now. And once again, I'm using a stitch length of 4mm. I think I'd actually like to cross into the corners as well. Not sure. Once I do it, I'm going to have to stick with it for all of them. I think I'll do it for this bag, and if I don't like it, the next bag won't have the crosses. Before we attach the lining, we're going to cut out the box corners. And I don't want very big box corners for this bag, So if I just cut out a 1-inch box, which is better seen on the back, that will be my cutting line, but my stitching line will be about 1/4 inch in, so it will give me a little bit bigger box corner. So that's what I'm going to do, is just make it a 1-inch cut. So we'll do that for the lining as well, and we can cut those corners out. So I've done the lining and the outer fabric. Now we're going to attach the lining to the bag pieces. We'll move the handle down, and this one here with a pocket will go onto the back of the bag, and this one that doesn't have anything on it will go to the front. So we've got our box corners at the bottom. Bring the fabric together so that you've got right sides facing, so that means you want the printed fabrics facing. And you can tape your handles down and out of the way if you like. Of course you can use pins, but I tend to prick myself with them. So I'll just tape that out of the way. Line up the top edge of the fabric. And we'll do the same for the other one. And we can now take both of these back to the machine and stitch along that top edge here. When we've done that, we're going to open this out, and I don't think I'm going to be top stitching this one. I think I'm going to be under stitching instead. So I'll show you that when we get to the machine. Again, I'm just using 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm also sewing with the stabilised fabric at the top. We'll repeat for the next one. So when you open out your fabric now, normally what we would do is top stitch. We would bring the lining fabric to the back of the bag and top stitch from the top edge. We're not actually going to do that with this bag, and the reason we're not doing that is because of this flap. So what I want to do is under stitch, which is pretty much the same as the top stitch. It's just working it from the inside instead of the outside. I've got my seam behind the lining, so I'm only actually going to be sewing the lining and the seam together. And we'll do the same for the other one. So there's your understitching there. And what's supposed to happen when you do understitching, particularly on garments, is that it will actually help necklines and things like that sit nice and evenly on your edges. With this upholstery fabric, it's a little bit more difficult, so I may still go and top stitch. I haven't decided yet though. But now that we have our bag pieces together here, we're going to place these right side together. We're going to line up the top section of the bag. We'll also line up the vinyl at the bottom. Then we'll line up the box corner, and then we'll ease all of that together. We'll repeat for the lining. I'm going to leave an opening on the side rather than the bottom. So big hand width. All right, let's sew this together. I'm going to start on the top of the bag, come all the way down, go around and sew up all of those bits. On the side that I'm leaving an opening, I'll backstitch at the beginning and the end and leave that open. Whenever I work with upholstery fabric, because I don't want to buy thicker threads, I'll always double stitch the outer fabric. I don't need to with the lining because it's usually just a cotton. But for anything with upholstery fabric or vinyls, I do like to double stitch my seams. Double check that you've got the top edge lined up nicely. And double check that you've got your vinyl lined up as well. Okay, the last thing we need to do is box our corners. So separate the fabric at the bottom, and you want this corner and this corner pinched out, and then line up your seams along the bottom. It's your decision if you want to open your seams or press them to the opposite side. This seam here has been folded to my right, so at this end I'll make sure that is over to the right as well, and the other one goes to the left. And for the lining we'll do the same. So all we need to do now is sew straight across each of these corners. You can do those individually. If you want to save a little bit of time, especially if you're sewing to sell, and we will do this in the next step regardless, but what you can do is take this corner, line up that seam with this corner. So before I do that, you can go and box your corners as is. It's all fine to do that. But if you want to save a step, and if you're a confident sewer, bring this corner up to here, clip those edges together, and you can sew the lining and the vinyl together in one go. It saves you the time, and it also means that the inside lining of your bag isn't going to come out whenever you take things in and out of your bag. So I will double stitch over that. For this side here, I will do the same. So I will take this corner, run that seam up in line, and clip those edges together and sew that in one go as well. So for those that aren't confident, I'm going to sew these two corners separately, and if you do have the confidence to do this, I'm going to sew this one together. Because there's a lot of bulk in the vinyl, I'm actually going to start in the centre first. That way it holds those seams in place and it's more likely to line up. So that's just the single corner, and this is the corner of the lining. And if you want to do it the quick way, I have the lining and the outer fabric lined up together. Again, because of the bulk, I'll start in the middle. So that's the lining and the outer fabric joined together. On the other side, we've just got the outer fabric and the lining separated. But now I'm going to bring them together. the stitch, I have my side seam along here and up around here. I grab the box corner, and as long as I have my side seams facing each other, everything's going to be just fine. And you can just place those layers back under your machine and stitch it down. So there we go, our corners are secure. This lining's never going to come out of the bag, and all we need to do is turn this the right way out. And you want to poke out your corners as well, and when you get to them, just want to roll that out. Oh, I'm happy with that alignment. Not so with that one. Alright, so I've decided that the understitching is definitely not enough with this bag because of the weight of the fabric, so I am going to go and top stitch that. You don't have to go and do that understitching at all if you don't want to, but I did actually want to have that stitched down just where the flap was. When you put the inside and outside together, if you do just want to go and stitch this side here, that'll help that flap sit a little bit better, I think. I'm going to go and top stitch all the way around the edge. I'll fold those edges under, and we also have our lining to close up. So we'll turn the bag inside out, pinch those edges together, and we'll stitch that closed. Then we will top stitch the bag. So I have my lining nice and evenly to the back, and we'll just top stitch close to the edge there. Okay, I do believe we are finished. So there's our pocket on the inside of the bag. You've got a channel there to put a pen or hang your glasses. Turn this the right way out and see how it looks. I'm pretty happy with that. I probably could have put the magnetic button a little bit closer to the end, but I didn't want it to get in the way of my stitching line. But look, if you want to, you can go a little bit closer to the edge. But once this settles down, it's going to be just fine. Gorgeous fabric once again. I do love this. And I really like the combination of the vinyl with the upholstery fabric. And I kind of like these as well. Very happy with that. So I'm very happy with this bag. I think it's a much more simplified version of this other one that I did last week, and I'm definitely going to be making my batch sewing video using this technique, or maybe even slightly less complicated. It's not complicated, but I may not have as many features in there. Haven't decided yet if I want to continue with the flap at the top, and I could simplify this even more by stitching my handles straight into the top seam rather than adding these little vinyl things at the front. They all add to my labour costs, and therefore the customer is going to have to pay more because of it. So I don't know, what do you think? I'm probably going to put about $65 on this bag, I think. I do have to make a few to see how long it actually takes me to make them, and I'll work that out. But I think for now I'll put $65 on this one. And this bigger one, I'll actually probably put the same price on that. I don't love it as much now that I've got this one. So, yeah, I don't know. If I'm going to make a batch sewing one, do you think I should have the flap and the little vinyl patches on there, or keep it more simple? Some of you may have noticed over the past couple of videos my voice is a little bit more husky. I don't think I'm quite up to singing like Bonnie Tyler yet. Probably never. It's the chemo doing that to me, so hopefully after all of that's finished, my voice will get back to normal again. I sure hope it does. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.